The black Mercedes pulled into the long driveway at exactly 6:15 in the evening. David Chen had been driving for 3 hours straight from the airport, his mind still buzzing from the biggest business deal of his career. The merger with the Japanese tech company was finally complete. 2 years of negotiations wrapped up in a single handshake in a Tokyo boardroom. He should have been celebrating. His team back in Japan was probably still toasting their success at some expensive restaurant in Shibuya. But all David wanted was to see his 8-year-old daughter Lily and tell her that Daddy was home early. The business trip was supposed to last another week, but once the contracts were signed, he'd caught the first flight back to Connecticut. The house looked peaceful in the golden evening light. The massive colonial estate sat on 5 acres of perfectly manicured lawn, surrounded by old oak trees that his late father had planted decades ago. This was the house where David had grown up, the same house where he now wanted to give Lily the childhood he remembered fondly. His wife Jennifer was visiting her sick mother in California and wouldn't be back until Sunday. That left Lily in the care of Mrs. Washington, their housekeeper who had become so much more than just hired help over the past 3 years. David smiled thinking about Mrs. Washington. The 60-year-old woman had been a godsend when they first hired her. Lily had just turned 5 then, and finding good childcare had been a nightmare for 2 working parents. Mrs. Washington came with perfect references and a warm smile that immediately put everyone at ease. More importantly, Lily had taken to her instantly, something that rarely happened with new people. He parked the car and grabbed his briefcase from the passenger seat. The house was unusually quiet for a Tuesday evening. Usually he could hear the sound of cartoons or Lily's laughter echoing through the windows. Today everything seemed still. Maybe they were in the backyard, he thought. Mrs. Washington loved gardening, and Lily enjoyed helping her plant flowers. David used his key to enter through the front door, setting his briefcase down on the marble floor of the foyer. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6:30. Lily should be having dinner soon or maybe finishing up her homework. He called out hello but got no response. The silence felt strange, almost heavy. He walked through the living room, past the piano that Lily was learning to play, past the bookshelves filled with her favorite stories. The kitchen was empty too, though he noticed 2 plates in the sink and the lingering smell of tomato soup in the air. They had definitely been here recently. That's when he heard it, a sound from upstairs that made his blood run cold. It was muffled, but it sounded like his daughter's voice, and she seemed to be in distress. There was also another voice, deeper, more urgent. Mrs. Washington's voice. David's parental instincts kicked in immediately. He dropped everything and rushed toward the staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. The sounds were coming from Lily's bedroom at the end of the hallway. As he got closer, he could hear what sounded like a struggle. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. The door to Lily's room was slightly open, just enough for him to see inside without being noticed. What he saw made him freeze in absolute horror. Mrs. Washington was on the bed with Lily, and his daughter appeared to be fighting against her. Lily's legs were kicking, and she was making choking, gasping sounds that no parent ever wants to hear. Mrs. Washington had her arms around Lily from behind, and it looked like she was restraining the child. From David's angle, it appeared that Mrs. Washington was forcing something into Lily's mouth, while Lily struggled desperately to get away. The sounds his daughter was making were not normal crying or complaining. They were the sounds of someone in genuine distress, someone who couldn't breathe properly. David's mind immediately went to the darkest possible places. All those news stories he'd heard about trusted caregivers who turned out to be dangerous. All those warnings about being careful who you leave your children with. Mrs. Washington had seemed so perfect, so trustworthy. How could he have been so wrong about her? Every instinct he had as a father screamed at him to act. His little girl was in danger, and he was the only one who could save her. The woman he had trusted with his most precious possession was hurting her, and God only knew how long this had been going on, or what else might have happened. Time seemed to slow down as David processed what he was seeing. Mrs. Washington was a large woman, much stronger than his small daughter. Lily didn't stand a chance against her if she really wanted to hurt her. The realization that this might have been happening for weeks or months without his knowledge made him feel sick to his stomach. He thought about all the times he had come home to find Lily happy and content. All the times Mrs. Washington had smiled and told him what a wonderful day they'd had together. Had it all been an act? Had she been manipulating him this whole time while doing unspeakable things to his child? The protective rage that built up inside him was unlike anything he had ever felt before. This was his baby girl, his only child, the center of his universe. He had worked so hard to provide for her, to give her everything she needed, and he had failed at the most basic job of any parent keeping her safe. David burst through the bedroom door like a man possessed. His voice, when it came, was louder and more furious than he had ever heard it. He shouted at Mrs. Washington to get away from his daughter, to take her hands off Lily immediately. The words that came out of his mouth were raw with panic and anger, the kind of words that come from a place of pure primal fear. Mrs. Washington immediately jumped back from the bed, her eyes wide with shock at his sudden appearance. She opened her mouth to say something, but David was beyond listening to explanations. All he could see was his daughter on the bed, looking confused and scared, with tears in her eyes. Lily sat up slowly, looking back and forth between her father and Mrs. Washington with obvious confusion. She wasn't crying the way David expected a traumatized child to cry. Instead, she looked more bewildered than afraid, as if she couldn't understand why her father was yelling. But David was too angry, too scared, too protective to notice the details. All he knew was that he had walked in on what looked like his housekeeper hurting his child, and nothing else mattered in that moment. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone to call the police. His voice still raised as he demanded that Mrs. Washington explain what she thought she was doing to his daughter. The next few minutes would change everything for their family, though David had no way of knowing that yet. All he knew was that he had to protect Lily, no matter what it cost him. Mrs. Washington stumbled backward, her face showing pure shock at David's explosive entrance. Her hands were raised defensively, and she was trying to speak, but David couldn't hear anything over the sound of his own blood rushing in his ears. His daughter Lily was sitting on the bed now, her small frame looking even tinier in her pink pajamas, staring at her father with wide, confused eyes. "Don't you dare move!" David shouted, his finger pointing at Mrs. Washington like a weapon. His voice was hoarse from yelling, and he could feel sweat forming on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Stay right where you are until the police get here." Mrs. Washington's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words, but nothing came out. Her usually calm and composed demeanor was completely shattered. The woman who had always greeted him with a warm smile and updates about Lily's day now looked terrified and confused. "Daddy," Lily's small voice cut through the tension in the room. She was looking back and forth between the two adults, clearly not understanding why her father was so angry. "Why are you yelling at Mrs. Washington?" David's heart was still pounding as he moved toward his daughter, keeping his eyes on Mrs. Washington the whole time. He had to make sure she didn't try to run or do something even worse. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone steady as he dialed 911. "Lily, baby, come here to Daddy," he said, trying to make his voice gentler for his daughter while still watching Mrs. Washington like a hawk. "Everything's going to be okay now." But Lily didn't move toward him. Instead, she looked even more confused. "Daddy, Mrs. Washington was helping me. Why are you being mean to her?" The words hit David like a physical blow. Helping her? What kind of help involved restraining a child and forcing things into her mouth? He had seen what he had seen, and no amount of explanation could change that. His daughter was just too young to understand what had really been happening to her. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the phone was calm and professional. "I need police at my house immediately," David said, his voice shaking. "I came home and found my housekeeper." He paused, looking at Lily. He didn't want to say too much in front of her, but he needed help fast. "I found her doing something to my 8-year-old daughter. Something that didn't look right." Mrs. Washington finally found her voice. "Mr. Chen, please, if you would just let me explain what happened—" "Don't!" David cut her off sharply. "Don't say another word. You've done enough." The dispatcher was asking for his address and more details, But David was struggling to think clearly. Everything felt surreal, like he was watching someone else's life fall apart. This morning, he had been in a boardroom in Tokyo, celebrating the biggest success of his career. Now he was in his daughter's bedroom calling the police on a woman he had trusted completely. "Sir, can you tell me exactly what you witnessed?" the dispatcher asked. David looked at Lily, who was still sitting on the bed, now with tears starting to form in her eyes. Not because of whatever had happened with Mrs. Washington, but because her father was yelling and acting scary. "I saw her holding my daughter down on the bed," he said quietly, turning away from Lily. "My daughter was making distressed sounds, and it looked like she was forcing something into her mouth." Mrs. Washington let out a sound that was almost like a sob. "Mr. Chen, please, she was choking. The candy was stuck in her throat, and I was trying to help her breathe." "Liar!" David snapped. "I saw what I saw." But even as he said it, something nagged at the back of his mind. Mrs. Washington had been with them for 3 years. 3 years of coming to work every day with a smile, of taking genuine interest in Lily's schoolwork and hobbies, of staying late when he and Jennifer had to work, of never asking for anything extra in return. 3 years of Lily running to the door whenever she heard Mrs. Washington's car in the driveway. "The officers are on their way," the dispatcher told him. "Are you and your daughter safe right now?" "Yes," David said, though he wasn't entirely sure. Mrs. Washington was still standing by the window, looking like she was fighting back tears. She hadn't tried to leave or argue further. She just stood there, looking devastated. "Daddy, you're scaring me," Lily said, her voice small and shaky. "I don't understand what's happening." David's heart broke a little at the fear in his daughter's voice. He was supposed to protect her, to make her feel safe, but right now he was the one making her cry. He sat down on the edge of the bed and tried to pull her close, but Lily pulled away from him. "I want Mrs. Washington to stay," she said, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "She wasn't doing anything bad, Daddy. She was helping me because the candy got stuck." The candy got stuck. Mrs. Washington had said the same thing. David looked at his daughter more carefully. Her face was red and blotchy, but not in the way it would be if she'd been crying from fear or pain. It looked more like the way she looked after coughing really hard, or after running around outside. But no, he couldn't let his daughter's innocent words make him doubt what he had seen with his own eyes. Children often didn't understand when adults were hurting them, especially when those adults had spent time building trust. He had read articles about this exact scenario. "Sir, the officers should be there in about 5 minutes, the dispatcher said. "Please stay on the line with me until they arrive." Mrs. Washington spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lily, sweetheart, can you tell your daddy what happened with the candy?" "Don't talk to her," David said firmly. "Don't say another word to my daughter." But Lily was already talking. "I was eating the hard candy Mrs. Washington gave me after dinner, the red one that tastes like cherries. But then it got stuck in my throat and I couldn't breathe right. Mrs. Washington said she had to help me get it out so I could breathe again." David felt something cold settle in his stomach. Lily was describing the Heimlich maneuver. But that couldn't be right. What he had seen hadn't looked like someone trying to help. It had looked like someone trying to hurt his child. "She's confused," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "She doesn't understand what really happened." Mrs. Washington was crying now, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "I would never hurt Lily," she said quietly. "Never. She's like my own granddaughter." The sound of sirens was getting closer. David could see the red and blue lights reflecting off the window. Soon, there would be police officers in his house, asking questions, taking statements, trying to figure out the truth of what had happened in this room. Lily heard the sirens too and became even more upset. "Daddy, why are the police coming? Mrs. Washington didn't do anything wrong." David didn't know how to answer her. In his mind, he kept replaying what he had seen. Mrs. Washington holding Lily from behind, Lily's legs kicking, the sounds of distress. But now, mixed with that memory, were Lily's words about choking on candy and Mrs. Washington's calm explanation about trying to help. The doorbell rang, and David knew that whatever happened next would change everything for their family. He just wasn't sure yet whether it would be justice for his daughter or the biggest mistake of his life. The police officers were younger than David had expected. Officer Martinez looked like he couldn't be much older than 25, while his partner, Officer Thompson, had kind eyes but a serious expression. They stood in Lily's bedroom doorway, taking in the scene with professional calm that David found both reassuring and frustrating. "Mr. Chen, I'm Officer Martinez. We got a call about a possible incident involving your daughter and your housekeeper. Can you tell us what happened?" David's mouth felt dry as he tried to organize his thoughts. Mrs. Washington was still standing by the window, her hands clasped in front of her like she was praying. Lily had finally stopped crying, but was clinging to her favorite stuffed elephant, watching everything with wide eyes. "I came home from a business trip early," David began, his voice steadier now that help had arrived. "I heard sounds from upstairs that didn't seem right. When I looked into my daughter's room, I saw Mrs. Washington on the bed with Lily. She was holding her down, and Lily was struggling. It looked like she was forcing something into my daughter's mouth." Officer Thompson was writing everything down in a small notebook. "And what did you do then?" "I yelled at her to get away from Lily and called you immediately." The officers looked at Mrs. Washington, who was wiping tears from her cheeks with a tissue. "Ma'am, would you like to tell us your version of what happened?" Mrs. Washington's voice was shaky but clear. Lily was eating a piece of hard candy after dinner. She started choking on it. "I could see she couldn't breathe properly, so I performed the Heimlich maneuver to dislodge the candy from her throat." "That's ridiculous," David said quickly. "What I saw didn't look anything like someone trying to help. My daughter was fighting against her." Officer Martinez crouched down to Lily's eye level. "Hi there, sweetheart. I'm Officer Martinez. Can you tell me what happened with the candy?" Lily looked at her father, then at Mrs. Washington, then back at the officer. "I was eating my favorite red candy, but it got stuck in my throat and I couldn't breathe. It was scary. Mrs. Washington helped me get it out so I could breathe again." David felt his confidence waver slightly, but he pushed the feeling away. "She's only 8 years old. She might not understand what really happened to her." "Daddy, I do understand," Lily said, her voice getting stronger. "Mrs. Washington saved me. The candy was stuck and I couldn't make any sounds. And then Mrs. Washington put her arms around me and pressed on my tummy until the candy came out. Then I could breathe again." Officer Thompson looked around the room. "Is the candy still here somewhere?" Mrs. Washington nodded toward the trash can by Lily's desk. "I threw it away after I got it out of her throat. It should be right on top." Officer Martinez walked over to the small pink trash can and looked inside. He used a pen to lift out a small red piece of hard candy, holding it up for everyone to see. "This it?" "Yes," both Lily and Mrs. Washington said at the same time. David stared at the candy. It was real. It existed, but that didn't necessarily prove anything, did it? Mrs. Washington could have put it there to cover up what she had really been doing. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of conflicting information. "Mr. Chen," Officer Thompson said gently, "I understand you're concerned about your daughter's safety. That's what any good parent would do. But from what we're hearing, it sounds like Mrs. Washington may have actually helped your daughter when she was choking." "But I saw her holding Lily down," David insisted. "I saw my daughter struggling, Daddy," Lily said, standing up on her bed so she was taller. "When someone is doing the Heimlich thing, they have to hold you tight. Mrs. Washington taught me about it before, remember? She said if I ever choked on something, she might have to squeeze my tummy to help the food come out." David's world felt like it was tilting sideways. He remembered that conversation now. It had been a few months ago, during dinner, when Lily had taken too big a bite of chicken. Mrs. Washington had gently reminded her to chew slowly and had explained about choking hazards. She had mentioned the Heimlich maneuver, saying it was something all parents and caregivers should know how to do. "The struggling you saw," Officer Martinez explained, "that's normal during a choking emergency. When someone can't breathe, their body automatically fights, even when someone is trying to help them. It's an instinctive response." Mrs. Washington spoke up quietly. "I've been trained in first aid and CPR. I renewed my certification just last year because I wanted to be prepared for any emergency with Lily. I have the certificate in my purse downstairs if you'd like to see it." David felt like the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. Everything Mrs. Washington was saying made sense. Everything Lily was telling the officers matched her story. But he had been so sure of what he had seen, so certain that his daughter was in danger. "I want to see that certificate," he said, though his voice lacked the conviction it had held earlier. Officer Thompson nodded. "That's a good idea. Mrs. Washington, would you mind getting that for us?" Mrs. Washington looked at David as if asking permission to leave the room. The fact that she was still trying to be respectful, even after being accused of hurting Lily, made something twist in David's chest. "Go ahead," he said quietly. While Mrs. Washington went downstairs to get her certification, Officer Martinez continued talking to Lily. "Can you show me where Mrs. Washington put her hands when she was helping you?" Lily demonstrated on her stuffed elephant, showing how Mrs. Washington had positioned her hands just below the rib cage, exactly where they should be for the Heimlich maneuver on a child. "And how did you feel after she helped you?" Officer Thompson asked. "Better," Lily said simply. "I could breathe again, and the candy was out of my mouth. But then Daddy came in and started yelling, and that made me scared." David's heart sank. His daughter had been scared not because of what Mrs. Washington had done, but because of how he had reacted. He had burst into the room like a madman, shouting and accusing, turning what should have been a moment of relief into a traumatic scene. Mrs. Washington returned with a laminated certificate from the American Red Cross, dated just 6 months ago. Officer Martinez examined it carefully and showed it to his partner. "This looks legitimate," he said. "Mrs. Washington, how long have you been working for this family?" 3 years, she answered. "I love this job. I love Lily like she was my own granddaughter. I would never, ever do anything to hurt her." Lily jumped off the bed and ran to Mrs. Washington, hugging her around the waist. "I love you too, Mrs. Washington. I'm sorry Daddy yelled at you." David watched his daughter cling to the woman he had just accused of harming her. The trust and affection between them was obvious and real. Lily wasn't acting like a child who had been hurt or traumatized by Mrs. Washington. She was acting like a child who was upset that her beloved caregiver was being treated badly. "Mr. Chen," Officer Thompson said carefully, "based on what we've heard tonight, it appears that Mrs. Washington performed life-saving first aid on your daughter. Without her quick action, this could have been a very different kind of emergency call." The words hit David like a punch to the stomach. Mrs. Washington hadn't been hurting Lily. She had been saving her life. And instead of gratitude, he had given her accusation, humiliation, and the trauma of being treated like a criminal. The officers spent another 20 minutes taking statements and making sure everyone was okay. They were professional and kind, but David could see the judgment in their eyes. He was the man who had called the police on a woman who had just saved his child's life. After they left, the house felt impossibly quiet. Mrs. Washington was packing her things in the kitchen, tears still flowing silently down her face. Lily was in her room, confused and upset about why the evening had gone so wrong. David stood in his hallway, surrounded by the life he had built, and realized he had possibly just destroyed the best thing in it. David stood in his kitchen at 6 in the morning, staring at the empty coffee mug in his hands. He hadn't slept at all. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mrs. Washington's face when the police officers had finally left. The hurt in her eyes wasn't just about being falsely accused. It was deeper than that. It was the look of someone whose heart had been completely broken. Lily had refused to talk to him after Mrs. Washington packed up and left. She had locked herself in her room and wouldn't even come out for dinner. When he knocked on her door to say goodnight, all he heard was quiet crying. His 8-year-old daughter was grieving, and it was entirely his fault. The house felt different without Mrs. Washington's presence. Too quiet, too empty. For 3 years, she had been the heartbeat of their home. She arrived every morning at 7:30 with a smile and left each evening after making sure everything was perfect for the family. She knew exactly how Lily liked her sandwiches cut, which bedtime stories were her favorites, and how to braid her hair the way she saw in magazines. David's phone buzzed on the counter. A text message from his wife, Jennifer. "How did the surprise homecoming go? I bet Lily was thrilled to see you early." He stared at the message, his stomach churning. How could he explain what had happened? How could he tell his wife that he had destroyed their daughter's relationship with the woman who had become like a grandmother to her? Instead of texting back, he called her. Jennifer answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "David! You're up early. How was Tokyo? Did the merger go through?" "The merger was fine," he said, his voice flat. "Jennifer, we need to talk about something that happened yesterday." The change in his tone must have alarmed her because her voice immediately became serious. "What's wrong? Is Lily okay?" "Lily is physically fine, but something happened with Mrs. Washington." He took a deep breath and told her everything. The sounds he heard upstairs, what he thought he saw calling the police, the truth about the choking incident, and Mrs. Washington's departure. Jennifer was quiet for a long time after he finished talking. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You called the police on Mrs. Washington? The woman who saved our daughter's life." "I thought I was protecting Lily," David said desperately. "I thought she was being hurt." "But David, you know Mrs. Washington. You know what kind of person she is. How could you jump to such a terrible conclusion?" The question hit him like a slap. How could he explain the panic that had taken over his rational thinking? How could he describe the way his protective instincts had overridden everything else he knew about Mrs. Washington's character? "I don't know," he admitted. "I just saw what looked like Lily in distress and I reacted." "Where is she now?" "Gone. She packed her things and left last night. She didn't even say goodbye to Lily." Jennifer was crying now. He could hear it in her voice. "David, do you understand what you've done? Mrs. Washington loves Lily more than anything. She would throw herself in front of a car to protect her, and you accused her of being the kind of person who would hurt a child." "I know," David said, his own voice cracking. "I know I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Jennifer's voice rose. "This isn't a mistake, David. This is devastating. For Mrs. Washington, for Lily, for all of us." After Jennifer hung up, promising to catch the next flight home, David sat in the silence of his kitchen and tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. Less than 24 hours ago, he had been on top of the world. The biggest business deal of his career was complete, and he was rushing home to surprise his daughter. Now his family was falling apart. Around 8 o'clock, he heard Lily's bedroom door open upstairs. Small footsteps padded down the hallway and stopped at the top of the stairs. "Mrs. Washington?" Lily called out hopefully. David's heart broke all over again. "No, sweetheart. It's just Daddy. Mrs. Washington isn't here today." He heard a small sob, and then the bedroom door slammed shut again. David knew he had to do something, but he didn't know where to start. He had Mrs. Washington's phone number, but when he tried calling, it went straight to voicemail. He left 3 messages, each one more desperate than the last, begging her to call him back so he could apologize. By noon, he was pacing around his house like a caged animal. He needed to see Mrs. Washington face to face, to explain what had happened, to try to make things right. But he realized he didn't even know where she lived. In 3 years of employment, he had never visited her home. He knew she lived about 20 minutes away, but that was all. He called the agency that had originally recommended Mrs. Washington to them. The woman who answered was professional, but cold when she heard what had happened. "Mr. Chen, I have to tell you that what occurred last night reflects very poorly on your family," she said. "Mrs. Washington is one of our most trusted and experienced caregivers. The fact that you would accuse her of harming a child is deeply concerning." "I understand that," David said quickly. "I made a terrible mistake. I need to find her so I can apologize properly. Can you give me her address?" "I'm sorry, but I cannot give out personal information about our employees." "Even former employees?" "Former employees? Mrs. Washington called us this morning and asked to be removed from our active roster. She said she couldn't continue working as a nanny after what happened. She was too upset to even finish the conversation. David felt like he had been punched in the stomach. Mrs. Washington wasn't just leaving their family. She was leaving the profession she loved because of what he had done to her. He spent the rest of the day trying different approaches. He called the local Red Cross chapter where she had gotten her first aid certification, but they wouldn't give out personal information either. He even considered hiring a private investigator, but something about that felt wrong, like he would be violating her privacy even more. That evening, Lily finally came downstairs for dinner, but she wouldn't look at him. She picked at her food silently while David tried to start a conversation. "Lily, I know you're upset about Mrs. Washington. You made her go away, Lily said quietly, still not looking up from her plate. I made a mistake, sweetheart. I thought something bad was happening, but I was wrong. Mrs. Washington was helping me breathe, Lily said, her voice getting stronger. She saved me and you yelled at her and made the police come. Now she's gone and she's never coming back. Maybe she will come back, David said hopefully. Maybe if I can find her and apologize. No, Lily interrupted, finally looking at him with eyes full of tears. She won't come back. I heard her crying when she was packing. She was really sad. Sadder than when her dog died last year. David didn't know Mrs. Washington's dog had died. There was so much about her life that he didn't know. So many ways she had been part of their family without him really seeing her as a whole. Person, I'm going to fix this, he promised. Lily. I'm going to find Mrs. Washington and make everything better. But as he said the words, he wondered if some things were too broken to fix. Mrs. Washington had given their family 3 years of love, dedication, and care. In return, he had given her the worst night of her life. The question now was whether love and trust, once shattered, could ever be put back together again. 3 days had passed since Mrs. Washington left, and the house felt like a tomb. David had barely eaten, barely slept, and spent every waking hour trying to find some way to reach the woman whose life he had turned upside down. Lily hadn't spoken to him since their brief conversation at dinner. She moved through the house like a ghost, going through the motions of eating and getting ready for school, but the light had gone out of her eyes. Jennifer had arrived home the night before, and the reunion had been nothing like the joyful family moments David usually looked forward to. His wife had hugged Lily for a long time, both of them crying, while David stood in the doorway, feeling like an outsider in his own home. Mommy, can you make Mrs. Washington come back? Lily had asked through her tears. I don't know, baby, Jennifer had answered honestly. Daddy hurt her feelings very badly. Sometimes when people get hurt that much, it takes a long time for them to feel better. Now, sitting in his home office while Jennifer got Lily ready for school, David stared at his computer screen. He had been searching online for any trace of Mrs. Washington, but she wasn't on social media, and her name was too common to get useful results. He felt helpless in a way he had never experienced before. In his business world, every problem had a solution. Every challenge could be overcome with enough money, connections, or determination. But this wasn't about business deals or negotiations. This was about trust, about human dignity, about the kind of damage that couldn't be fixed with a check or a contract. His phone rang, and he grabbed it hopefully, but it was just his assistant asking about rescheduling meetings. David realized he hadn't even thought about work since he'd come home. The merger that had seemed so important 3 days ago now felt meaningless compared to the disaster he had created in his personal life. After Jennifer left to drive Lily to school, David decided to try a different approach. He drove to the grocery store where he remembered Mrs. Washington saying she shopped. It was a long shot, but maybe someone there would know her, or maybe he would just get lucky and run into her. The store manager was polite but couldn't help him. I'm sorry, sir, but even if I did know this person, I couldn't give out personal information about our customers. David spent 2 hours walking through every aisle, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who had become so important to his family. He felt like a stalker, and several employees started giving him suspicious looks. Finally, he gave up and went home, feeling more defeated than ever. That afternoon, while Lily was at school, David made a decision that surprised even himself. He got in his car and started driving to every neighborhood within a 20-mile radius of his house. He was looking for Mrs. Washington's car, a reliable blue Honda that had been parked in his driveway every weekday for 3 years. It was a desperate plan and probably hopeless, but he had to do something. He couldn't just sit in his house watching his daughter's heart break while the woman who loved her most was somewhere out there, probably crying and wondering why the family she had devoted herself to had turned against her so cruelly. The search took him through neighborhoods he had never seen before, past small apartment complexes and modest single-family homes. It made him realize how little he knew about Mrs. Washington's life outside of his house. He knew she was a widow, that she had grown children who lived in other states, and that she had worked as a nanny for most of her adult life. But he didn't know her favorite restaurant, her hobbies, her friends, or even her exact age. As he drove through a quiet neighborhood of small houses with neat yards, David thought about all the conversations they had had over the years. Mrs. Washington always asked about his work, his travels, his plans for the weekend. She remembered details about his business meetings and asked follow-up questions about deals he was working on. But how often had he asked about her life? How often had he shown the same interest in her world that she showed in his? The answer made him feel ashamed. He had treated Mrs. Washington kindly, and he had always paid her well, but he had never really seen her as a whole person with her own dreams, struggles, and feelings. She had been part of the machinery that kept his household running smoothly, valuable and appreciated, but not truly known. On his third day of searching, David finally found the blue Honda parked outside a small house on Maple Street. His heart pounded as he parked across the street and stared at the modest home with its flower garden and white picket fence. This was where Mrs. Washington lived, where she came home every evening after spending her days taking care of his family. He sat in his car for 20 minutes, trying to work up the courage to knock on her door. What would he say? How could he possibly explain the fear and panic that had made him jump to such a horrible conclusion? How could he ask for forgiveness when he wasn't sure he deserved it? Finally, he got out of his car and walked slowly to the front door. His hands were shaking as he rang the doorbell. He could hear movement inside, and then the door opened just a crack. Held by a security chain, Mrs. Washington's eye appeared in the gap, and when she saw him, her expression immediately became guarded and sad. "Mr. Chen," she said quietly, "what are you doing here?" "I came to apologize," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I came to beg you to forgive me for the terrible thing I did to you." "How did you find my address?" "I drove around for 3 days looking for your car." "Mrs. Washington, please, I know I have no right to ask this, but could I just talk to you for a few minutes? I need you to know how sorry I am." There was a long pause, and David held his breath. Finally, Mrs. Washington closed the door, and he heard the sound of the chain being removed. When the door opened again, she stepped onto her front porch, but she didn't invite him inside. She looked smaller than he remembered, older and more fragile. Her eyes were red from crying, and she was wearing an old sweater that had seen better days. David realized he had never seen her in anything but her neat work clothes and her kind smile. "I've been crying for 3 days," she said simply. "I keep thinking about Lily asking why her daddy was so angry with me. I keep wondering what I did wrong, what I could have done differently." "You didn't do anything wrong," David said urgently. "Nothing at all. You saved my daughter's life, and instead of thanking you, I treated you like a criminal. The mistake was mine. Completely mine." Mrs. Washington looked at him for a long moment, and David could see the pain in her eyes. "Do you know what hurt the most, Mr. Chen? It wasn't being accused of something terrible. It wasn't having the police called on me, though that was humiliating. The worst part was realizing that after 3 years of loving your family like my own, you could look at me and see someone who would hurt a child." Her words hit him like physical blows. She was right. That was the real damage he had done. He hadn't just made a mistake about what he thought he saw. He had revealed that deep down, when crisis struck, he didn't really trust her at all. "I was wrong," he said, tears starting to fall down his cheeks. "I was scared and I reacted without thinking, but that's no excuse. You deserved better from me. Lily deserved better. Our whole family deserved better." Mrs. Washington was crying too now. "Lily is like my own granddaughter," she said. "I would die before I let anyone hurt her. The fact that you could think otherwise, even for a moment—" "I know," David said. "I know, and I'm so sorry. Is there any way you could ever forgive me? Is there any chance you might consider coming back to work for us?" Mrs. Washington shook her head sadly. "I can't, Mr. Chen. The trust is broken. Every time you looked at me, you would remember what you thought I was capable of. And I would remember how little you really knew me, even after all these years." David felt his last hope crumbling. "What about Lily?" "She's been heartbroken since you left. She won't talk to me, won't eat properly. She needs you. And I need her." Mrs. Washington admitted. But sometimes loving someone means knowing when to let go. Maybe it's better this way. Maybe you and Lily need time to build your own relationship without me in between. As David drove home with Mrs. Washington's gentle but firm refusal echoing in his head, he realized that some mistakes can't be undone. Some wounds cut too deep to heal completely. He had found Mrs. Washington, he had apologized, but he couldn't give her back her sense of safety and trust. The question now wasn't whether he could fix what he had broken. The question was whether he could learn to live with the consequences of his actions, and whether his daughter would ever be able to forgive him for taking away the person she loved most. 2 weeks after his heartbreaking conversation with Mrs. Washington, David sat at his kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and a newspaper he wasn't reading. The house still felt empty, but something had changed in the past few days. Lily had started talking to him again, though their conversations were careful and polite, like they were strangers learning to know each other. Jennifer had helped bridge the gap between father and daughter, explaining to Lily that sometimes adults make terrible mistakes when they're scared, and that Daddy was very sorry for what he had done. But David knew that sorry wasn't enough. He needed to show both his wife and daughter that he had learned something from this disaster. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. David wasn't expecting anyone, and for a wild moment, he hoped it might be Mrs. Washington. But when he opened the door, he found a young woman holding a clipboard, probably selling something or asking for donations. "Mr. Chen?" she asked. "I'm Rebecca Martinez. I work for the Community Care Network. I was hoping to talk to you about Mrs. Washington." David's heart jumped. "Is she okay? Did something happen to her?" "She's fine physically," Rebecca said carefully. "But I understand there was some kind of incident a few weeks ago that resulted in her leaving your employment. I was hoping you might be willing to help us understand what happened." David invited her inside, though he felt nervous about where this conversation might be heading. Rebecca explained that Mrs. Washington had been volunteering at a local community center, helping elderly residents with daily tasks and companionship. She had mentioned to the staff that she was no longer working as a nanny, and when they asked why, she had become very upset. "The thing is," Rebecca continued, "Mrs. Washington is one of the most caring people I've ever met. She lights up when she talks about the children she's cared for over the years. But when your daughter's name comes up, she starts crying. She won't tell us exactly what happened, but it's clear that losing your family has broken her heart." David felt that familiar twist in his stomach. Even now, weeks later, Mrs. Washington was still suffering because of his actions. "What can I do to help?" he asked. "I'm not sure yet," Rebecca admitted. "But I was hoping you might be willing to meet with our director. Mrs. Washington needs some kind of closure, some way to heal from whatever happened. And frankly, we're worried about her. She's always been so strong, but this has really shaken her confidence." That afternoon, David found himself in the offices of the Community Care Network. Sitting across from Director Patricia Coleman, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Mr. Chen, I'm going to be very direct with you," she began. "In the 3 weeks that Mrs. Washington has been volunteering here, I've watched one of the most nurturing people I've ever known question whether she should be around children at all. She's convinced that she somehow failed your family, though she won't tell us how." David took a deep breath and told the whole story once again. Director Coleman listened without interruption, her expression growing sadder as he spoke. "So you accused a woman who saved your child's life of being a predator?" she said when he finished. "Yes," David said quietly. "And I know how that sounds. I know how terrible it was. Do you? Because Mrs. Washington isn't just dealing with hurt feelings. She's dealing with a complete crisis of confidence. She's questioning whether she misread the situation somehow, whether she should have done something differently, whether she's lost her ability to care for children safely." The weight of this revelation nearly crushed David. He had thought his mistake was about one bad night, one moment of poor judgment. But Mrs. Washington was still living with the aftermath every day, still wondering if somehow she had been at fault. "What can I do?" he asked desperately. "How can I help her understand that this was my mistake, not hers?" Director Coleman studied him for a long moment. "There might be a way, but it would require you to be very honest about your own failings. and very public about making things right. She explained that the Community Care Network was planning a fundraising event the following month, a dinner where they would honor outstanding volunteers and caregivers in the community. They had been planning to give Mrs. Washington a special recognition award for her years of dedicated service to families and children. "If you were willing to present that award," Director Coleman said, "and if you were willing to tell the story of how Mrs. Washington saved your daughter's life, it might help restore her confidence. But you would have to do it in front of about 200 people, including many families who employ nannies and caregivers. You would have to publicly acknowledge your mistake." David didn't hesitate. "I'll do it." Even knowing that some people might judge you harshly, even knowing that your business reputation might suffer when people learn that you called the police on a woman who was saving your child? "Even then," David said firmly, "Mrs. Washington deserves to have people know the truth about what kind of person she is." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. David worked with Director Coleman to plan the presentation, but he insisted that Mrs. Washington not be told about his involvement ahead of time. He was afraid she might not come if she knew he would be there. Meanwhile, at home, things were slowly getting better with Lily. David had started spending real time with his daughter, not just the quick conversations between work and bedtime that had been his pattern before. He learned that she was worried about fractions in math, that her best friend at school was moving away, and that she had been having bad dreams since the night with Mrs. Washington. "I keep dreaming that I'm choking and no one can help me," Lily told him one evening as he tucked her into bed. "But Mrs. Washington did help you," David said gently. "She knew exactly what to do, and she saved you." "I know," Lily said, "but in my dream she's not there. And you don't know how to help me." David's heart broke a little more. His daughter's bad dreams weren't just about choking. They were about not being able to count on the people who were supposed to protect her. "Lily, I want you to know that I'm learning how to be a better daddy," he said. "I'm learning how to really listen and how to not jump to scary conclusions. And I'm going to make sure you know that you can always count on me." The night of the Community Care Network dinner arrived faster than David expected. He stood backstage at the hotel ballroom, his hands sweating as he reviewed his speech one more time. Through a crack in the curtains, he could see Mrs. Washington sitting at a table near the front, looking elegant in a navy blue dress he had never seen before. When his name was called, David walked to the podium with his heart pounding. The room was full of families, caregivers, and community leaders. He saw some faces he recognized from business events and knew that word of this speech would spread quickly through his professional network. "Good evening," he began, his voice steadier than he had expected. "I'm here tonight to present an award to someone who deserves recognition not just for her years of service, but for her incredible courage and skill in a moment of crisis." He told the story of that terrible evening 3 weeks ago, leaving nothing out. He described his panic when he heard sounds from upstairs, his rush to judgment when he saw Mrs. Washington with Lily, and his devastating realization that he had accused a hero of being a villain. "Mrs. Washington saved my daughter's life," he said, his voice getting stronger. "And instead of thanking her, I humiliated her. Instead of recognizing her expertise, I questioned her character. Instead of celebrating the fact that my child was safe, I destroyed the trust of the person who made that safety possible." The room was completely quiet. David could see Mrs. Washington in the audience, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not sharing this story to make myself look good," he continued. "There's nothing good about what I did. I'm sharing it because Mrs. Washington needs to know, and all of you need to know, that she is exactly the kind of person you want caring for your children. She is trained, she is skilled, she is loving, and when crisis strikes, she acts with courage and competence." He paused, looking directly at Mrs. Washington. "Mrs. Washington, I know I can never undo the hurt I caused you, but I want everyone in this room to know that you are a hero. My daughter is alive because of you. My family is forever in your debt." The applause started slowly and then built to a standing ovation. Through his tears, David could see Mrs. Washington being hugged by the people at her table, all of them celebrating the recognition she so richly deserved. After the ceremony, Mrs. Washington approached him in the lobby. She looked different somehow, more like the confident woman he remembered from before that terrible night. "Mr. Chen," she said softly, "thank you for what you said tonight. It means more than you know." "It was the truth," David replied. "It was the truth I should have recognized from the beginning." Mrs. Washington smiled for the first time since he had known her to smile since that night. "How is Lily doing?" "She misses you terribly." "We both do. I miss her too. Maybe I could visit sometime? Not to work, but just to see how she's growing up?" David felt hope bloom in his chest for the first time in weeks. She would love that. We both would. 6 months later, Mrs. Washington did more than just visit. She came back to work for the Chen family, but this time things were different.